tonight on the syllabus is supposed to be the divided monarchy to the exile of Judah, Babylonian history. Of course, we're back on the divided monarchy to the exile of Israel in Assyrian history. So this is a lot of material in this section that's here, and I probably was too ambitious putting it on one night like this. So we're going to start back there, and we'll get as far as we can, and then see on November 2nd. That's not going to be November 2nd. It'll be November we said 9th? Is that what we said? The 9th?
Yeah, because the 2nd is an event here.
Yeah. So we're going to move the November 2nd to the next week, which will be the 9th. If you do come here, you'll be involved in an event that's here. So,
Well, we can use them.
yeah. So. But you see, the last word on the syllabus is conclusion. That's where we're going to make up like the 6 hours that we're behind. But we'll try to get as far as we can tonight. We are talking about Ahab. So on this this handout that has the two kingdoms, Judah and Israel, we are talking about Israel with Ahab, and then we'll talk about Jehoshaphat. So let's go to 1 Kings chapter 19, and we'll talk a little bit about the aftermath of the victory on Mount Carmel. And so Ahab runs to Mount Carmel, and he is discouraged because Jezebel is seeking his life. She vows that I'll kill you. He gets there, and he's worn out, and he's discouraged. God asked him 2 times in this chapter what he's doing there, and he tells him to go to, God gives him food, and God gives him water, and tells him to journey to Mount Horeb, and Horeb is Sinai. And a lot of themes, I think, tied in with this. Sinai, and Elijah's there, and God asked him, in verse 9, what are you doing here? He asked him the same question in verse 13, what are you doing here? It's not that God doesn't know. And Elijah gives the same answer each time. And his answer is that I've been very zealous for the Lord, and I haven't forsaken you. They have, and I'm the only one left. And God's answer is, no, I have 7,000 that have bowed the knee to Baal. And as Paul quotes this in Romans 11, I think, is that right? I think it's Romans 11. First part.
9, 10, or 11.
Yeah, it's in that section, 9, 10, or 11. I'm going to go with 11. I was in the last part of 11 last night. But God says he has protected 7,000 have bowed the knee to Baal. And so Elijah is not alone. He's feeling discouraged. But as it gets us to Sinai, you have this, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a theophany. This is a manifestation of God. Just like a manifestation of God to Moses when he doesn't see his face. And so in verse 11, behold, and you have behold occurring several times in this section as well. The Yahweh passed by, and there was a great strong wind, but it says the Lord was not in the wind. And then there was an earthquake and a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And then in verse 12, there was, after the fire, and how do you have that translated? Something like still small voice, or
Sound of a low whisper.
Sound of a low whisper. This is a theophany, and that may be what he's saying is, after these mighty, powerful things, there's this, the three words there mean a sound or a voice of silence, of small silence, or something along that line. Sound or a voice of small silence. Or it could be some of these words are pretty ambiguous because small comes from a word that means to be crushed, to crush something really small. And so it could be the sound of a crushing sound of God, in a sense. And there's some people done some study on this, and they, in Genesis when it says they heard the voice of the Lord in the garden, it's after they sinned. And we usually get the idea that it's pleasant, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he calls by my name. That might not be so serene a picture. It might, because it's a manifestation, it's theophany of God, and God comes in thunder and lightning, and so there's that power. Now, this might be, as it's usually translated, still small voice, and saying that through these powerful things, here's God speaking. You have to listen to that. Thoughts, comments, disagreements? It's something for further study, I think. At the end of the day, Elijah is discouraged, and God basically says you have work to do. So, get to work.
I think some of that is, of course, God is very aware of how discouraged Elijah is, and all these other things are catastrophic. Shake, break, and bake. That's what it is, and yet, when you're discouraged, you don't listen when people yell at you, and are forceful with you. But if somebody will sit down and very calmly speak to you, you're more prone to listen. And I wonder if that's an element of that.
Could play into it. Anybody else? Okay, the chronology of the Elijah narratives is difficult to reconstruct. It's, I think, probably based on a topical pattern than a chronological pattern. But he is Ahab's nemesis. And he is there, and his message is what is his name. Yahweh is my God, not Baal. And Ahab is the one troubling Israel. Now, he was a pretty aggressive builder, and he comes off as a pretty effective leader as well. He, on 2 occasions, he defeated Aramaean forces that had a lot of strength. In chapter 20, a prophet predicted that he could do that. Ben-Hadad, who has 32 kings with him, besieged Samaria. And he boasted, and he said, this is what Ben-Hadad says, your gold, your children, your wives, your silver, it's all mine. So you might as well just send it to me. And if you're holding out anything else in your house, I'm sending people down there to check that tomorrow. And God says, I'll give you the victory, Ahab. And Ben-Hadad, and that's where Ahab says that you shouldn't boast that you won the battle before the battle. And Ben-Hadad ended up fleeing on horseback for his life. And Ben-Hadad's handlers said, okay, well, let's try to work something out. And they send messengers to Ahab. And Ahab says, Ben-Hadad, how is he doing? He's my brother. And a lot of people have wondered, why did he call him a brother? Maybe he's saying, I don't know where that is, in chapter 20, chapter 20, verse 32. Is he yet alive? He's my brother. But in the Battle of Karkar in 853, Ahab and Ben-Hadad joined together. In fact, Ahab sent 2,000 chariots and 10,000 soldiers. They were, in a sense, brothers that entered into an agreement there. Okay. In chapter, we have a couple more incidents in the life of Ahab. Chapter 21 is pretty famous about the vineyard that he wants. And any comments, questions on that? We don't have time to go verse by verse, but anything you want to ask or especially point out. In verse 7, he's sulking, and Naboth he can't sell the vineyard. It's in his family. It would go against Torah. And so Ahab it says, verse 4, came into the house sullen and displeased. Verse 5, sullen and displeased. By the way, look at verse 43 of this chapter.
It's interesting that Naboth says that about the inheritance of my fathers, and he's in the northern kingdom, and they're not necessarily following the law, the way that they should have been.
Yeah, they don't care. I mean, verse 43 of chapter 20. This is after he spared Ben-Hadad, and so it's the king of Israel, and a prophet showed up and said, you shouldn't have done that. He's set apart for destruction, just like Jericho was. Verse 43, the king of Israel went to his house, sullen and displeased, and he came to Samaria. It's the same phrase and same verbs. So he came by the vineyard, sullen and displeased. Verse 5, Jezebel comes in. Why are you sullen? And then he goes through the whole story, and in verse 7, she says, do you not govern the kingdom of Israel? And then she says, let your heart be merry. And she says, I will give you the vineyard. And the I is emphasized there. In Hebrew, the verb is a part, the subject of the verb is a part of the form of the verb. You don't need an additional pronoun. When it has an additional pronoun, it's emphasizing. It's like Adam said, the woman you gave to me, she gave me to eat from the tree. He's saying, she did it. He's really underscoring, she gave it to me. So when you do have an additional pronoun, it's emphasizing that pronoun. So she says, I will give you the vineyard of Naboth. And she wrote letters, and in verse 10, and the letters are to say that Naboth had cursed God and the king. And Celine, we were talking about this from Job. This is another illustration. Instead, in the Hebrew, it doesn't say curse, it says bless here. It's a euphemism. So it means curse. Otherwise, why don't you go write letters and say he deserves to die because he blessed God and the king?
And she doesn't care about that.
Yep.
She's a Baal worshiper.
Exactly.
But why does it say blessed if it means cursed? Did you talk about
Perhaps
that?
it's we don't know for sure, but perhaps it's a tendency on the authors to not have anybody really curse God, or to even have in the text curse God. But that's what they're doing, and it's in Job too. Job's wife says it, so you have it here, and the verb is barak, bless. So literally, the Hebrew says in verse 10, you put these base fellows and let them bear witness and say against him, you bless God and the king. You didn't, that's not the point. He cursed there to say curse God and the king. And it works, doesn't it? Because he's put to death, and apparently his family is as well, from 2 Kings 9 in verse 26. I guess to make sure there are no heirs for this field. So Ahab takes possession of this field, and the prophet meets him there and says, I'll bring evil on you. God says, I'll bring evil on you. You've done evil in his sight, and it'll be every male child, and I'll make your house like the house of Jeroboam. And we have something strange at the end of the chapter. After a summary of what, there's nobody else like him, he sold himself to do evil, and in verse 27 it happened when Ahab heard these words, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and fasted, and he went about with gentleness, dejected, I guess. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah and said, do you see how Ahab humbled himself before me? And because he humbled himself, I'll not bring the evil in his days, but in his son's days. That's really strange that you saw right here, after all this mess going on with him. All right, thoughts on those episodes? All right, as we said, he's a pretty good king in the sense of a military king, but he's a real bad king listening to God. And in chapter 22, he fought Damascus. They're always trying to recover Ramoth Gilead, and so Damascus has it, and they're going to try to get it back. And this is where the king of Judea at this time is Jehoshaphat. So on the other side here you have Ahab, and then you have Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat, not too wisely, had spent a lot of time with Ahab. And he's even entered into these agreements that we're going to battle together on this. And so he shows up and he says, go take what's rightfully mine. And Jehoshaphat says, well, what does God say about this? And they called in these prophets. The prophet, I guess the prophets who survived what happened on Mount Carmel. And what'd they say? He said, should we go? And what'd they say? Yeah, you got the green light, go on. Don't refrain. And Jehoshaphat says, is there not here a prophet of Yahweh that we might ask him? And Ahab said, yeah, there is, but I don't like him. He never says anything good about me. And they asked him, and with irony, he said, yeah, go ahead. And Ahab knows, he's been through it with him, And he said, now I tell you, you need to tell me the truth. And he said, well, I saw the, where is it? The sheep are scattered. Verse 17. Yeah, Israel scattered as sheep who have no shepherd. And so Ahab says to Jehoshaphat, did I tell you he doesn't say anything good about me? And so then Micaiah says, therefore hear the word of the Lord. And he tells this interesting thing here about, I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, the host of heaven about, and someone said, who shall entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said this way, and another said on this manner. And then there came forth the Spirit and stood before the Lord and said, I'll entice him. And he said, how? And he said, I'll put a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets, and they'll entice him. So Micaiah says that's what's happened. That's God is behind this. So, and there's some other interesting interchange between these prophets. And there's one guy running around with bronze horns and saying this is what Ahab's going to do. And I was thinking the other day, did he just go and have those specially made for this? Or, wait a minute, let me run to my chair and get those horns that they use at Vacation Bible School.
Is that in chapter 22?
Yes, it's in 22. So, in verse 29, Ahab and Jehoshaphat go up to Ramoth Gilead, And the king of Israel said, I'm going to disguise myself, you wear your royal robes. And earlier they're sitting, with their royal robes and threshing floor. And the disguise didn't work, did it? So he was killed in battle. In fact, Jehoshaphat barely got out of there, they're chasing him.
Well, that wasn't really smart for Jehoshaphat. It's like,
No.
you go dress like a king, and I'm all, okay.
Yeah, yeah. That's the impression we get of him. He's like naive, I think, in a sense. But it was common for kings to go into battle to look like kings because they are kings, and then the army is rally around them. So Jehoshaphat might have said, if you're that scared, you don't need to go into the battle. The prophet has said this. So, you think you can disguise yourself from God? So Ahab is killed in that battle.
When it says he's killed in verse 34?
Yeah, chance arrow.
Yeah, a certain man drew a bow at random.
Yep.
It's again, providence of God, it was at random. The man wasn't trying to kill Ahab.
Yeah.
But God was.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
God was behind that.
Yeah.
All right, anything else on that before we move over to Judah and look at Jehoshaphat? We've been introduced to him already in this episode here, but he reigned 25 years, and there was a co-regency with his father Asa, and Asa developed disease in his feet, and that led to the co-regency of his son reigning with him. And that's the first instance of co-rule of father and son. I think it happened 5 times. But, no, I'm sorry, total of 9 times in Israel and Judah. So the Bible writers say Jehoshaphat walked in the ways of Yahweh, especially during his early years, but he seems to be naive. Why is he frequently in associations and with people that he shouldn't be? And things that, not approved by Yahweh. He was nearly killed in this battle. Later, he joins, and Chronicles tells us this, I think maybe here in 1 Kings 22 as well, 48 and following. He joined in a shipbuilding venture with Ahab's eldest son. And every vessel was lost before the project ever took off. And then he allied himself with Ahab's second son, Jehoram, in a military offensive against Moab. And they nearly died in that because of lack of water. That's in 2 Kings 3. And each time he's rebuked by a prophet. And, he should listen to what Micaiah, the Hebrew calls, I guess we would pronounce it Micaiah or something. The Hebrew is Mikahu. So,
Like you said, he seems to be more naive than just deliberately reckless.
yep, I think so, yeah. And as a spiritual leader, he did pretty good. He failed to remove the high places, we're told, and he also gave orders for the Levites to go throughout the land and to teach the book of the law. And he must have had a strong reputation because nations felt necessary to band together against him. The Philistines and the Arabs brought gifts to him seeking his goodwill. So, any thoughts on Jehoshaphat before we move on?
Anyways, at the incident with against Moab, where they're running out of water, and they sent for Elisha happens to be in the area. Is it Elisha?
Yeah.
And he indicates in verse 14, Elisha said, "As the Lord of hosts lives, for whom I stand, were it not that I have regard for Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, I would neither look at you nor see you." he clearly doesn't have regard for the king of Israel. He clearly would not answer, and so even though Jehoshaphat's making poor choices, there's something that's still honorable about him, and he regards him, he still respects him as king, as someone who's has an interest in serving God.
Yeah, yeah. And he's a million times better than Ahab. All right, Ahab's two sons, we go back over to the northern kingdom, Ahab's two sons succeeded him, Achaziah, the eldest, and Jehoram. And Achaziah died after 2 years, reigning 2 years, and he didn't have a son. And his death was caused by, and this is the first couple of chapters of 2 Kings, wounds he received by falling through the lattice, the upper lattice of his palace.
No workman's comp.
Yeah, God, if you listen. But to learn if his wounds were fatal, where did he send to try to find out? Sent messengers to
Elijah.
Well, he sent Elijah, or met him on the way, but he sent messengers to the Philistines.
Yeah.
Inquire
Inquire
about
about
all of
them,
them.
yeah, the God of Ekron.
Yeah, they were intercepted by Elijah and returned with a view for the king and a message that he would not recover. Only two things we know about his short reign. He, as we already said, he entered into a joint maritime venture with Jehoshaphat, which failed almost immediately. And that was according to the word of the prophet. And the other event was that Mesha, M-E-S-H-A, the king of Moab, revolted against the heavy tribute that had been imposed by Omri. Omri was Ahab's father. He basically said, I'm not going to pay this anymore. And during all of that, especially when Ahab's death and Achaziah's death, Mesha broke away and had independence. All right, comments on him. About all I have to say on him. The Bible doesn't say a lot. All right, Ahab's second son, Joram or Jehoram, ruled for 12 years, and he was as evil as his brother and his father, according to the Bible. And he faced, the Arameans were pretty active and strong, and he also faced Elisha, one who succeeded Elijah. And one episode tells how the Aramean general Naaman, who had served under Ben-Hadad, came to the prophet on advice of this young maid that had been captured and said, what can we do to be healed of leprosy? And another was the Aramean king couldn't figure out why everywhere he'd move his army that they would know. And they sent a military contingent to capture Elisha, you remember that, but they were struck with blindness and led by the prophet into the city of Samaria. That's about 10 miles away. And they were treated kindly by Jehoram and returned home. Several months later, the Arameans returned with a larger force to Samaria and besieged that city. It's in 2 Kings 6 and 7. And Elisha again called the king and the nation to turn back to God, and he said the siege will be lifted and there will be plentiful food. And for some reason, unexplained reason, the Arameans fled in the night. That's the way things were. So in a final conflict, with Arameans again, Jehoram was seriously wounded. And while he's trying to recover from his wounds at his summer palace, Jehu came in. It was an insurrection and killed killed him. Jehoram first removed the Baal cults, images, and that gives an impression that he's not going to put up with Baal worship. But the prophet said, well, why don't you go seek counsel from Baal? That's really who you serve. That, and that's maybe implying that's your normal practice. He, as we said, tried to put down that revolt of Mesha, king of Moab, and that didn't work. Mesha rebounded. Okay, we're going to move on to the next king. Thoughts on him? Back in Judah is Jehoram, another Jehoram on the list. So you have Jehoshaphat, and then you have Jehoram that follows him. And he's the son of Jehoshaphat, and he's co-regent for 4 years of his reign. And we talk about Jehoshaphat, basically devotion to God. Jehoram didn't share that. What contributed to, I think, in a large part to this was his marriage to somebody he shouldn't have been married to. Who was that? Remember? The daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. Yeah, Athaliah.
Athaliah,
Yeah.
that's where she comes in.
And so, his 8 years of rule after his father's death had all kinds of tragedies. He slaughtered 6 of his brothers, and Athaliah continued the practice after Jehoram's death, and she is killing all her grandchildren except one, so she seized the throne. So we're up to her, sadly. Any thoughts? Trying to move through some of these a little quicker. I think we said last week we could spend a whole 10 weeks on the Book of Kings. There's a lot of drama there too. If you haven't read Kings, just sit down and read Kings sometime.
And this is where Jehu has killed both the kings of
Yeah.
the northern and southern kingdom at the same time. And so they're both, it's kind of like a restart almost,
Yeah.
for both nations.
Yeah. All right, under Judah, we're over there to Athaliah. She's daughter of Jezebel. She reigned for 6 years. And you'd think the catastrophes that have happened pretty recently would soften her, or maybe have some kind of effect on her. Her mother had been trampled by horses and eaten by dogs. Her brother, Jehoram, had been killed in a coup of Jehu. Her husband, Jehoram of Judah, had just died of disease of the bowels, pretty gruesome. Her son, Achaziah, had been killed by Jehu's men, and her other sons had been captured by raiding Philistines and Arabians. And you'd think all of that, you think all that happened in somebody's life. Instead, she just keeps on, we're going to worship Baal. And she, to give herself, trying to get, uncontested power, this is a very terrible thing. She murdered her own grandchildren. Yet, unknown to her, there was a baby, Joash. Do what, Scotty?
One stowaway.
Do what?
There was a stowaway.
There
Oh,
was a
yeah.
stowaway.
Yeah.
And if you don't care, if you have no more care for your own family than this, you're sure not going to care for anybody else.
Exactly. You don't want her as a queen. And so Joash, they hid him away, and at 7 years old, he's brought out of hiding, and he's crowned king.
The significance of all that is thinking about the
Davidic
bloodline
Yeah.
of for the Messiah.
Yeah,
Because it's down, it's
yeah.
very dim at the moment, you know, down to an infant,
Yeah,
you know.
that's right. And yeah, God is working in that, and there would be people who thought that significant that we have a king on the throne who's in the line of David because of the messianic implications. And at this point, if they didn't know about Joash, it's almost despair. But God's still working in that. God is in complete control, yet God is working with free human will. So when they bring Joash out and crown him king, she can do nothing more than just cry out, treason, treason. And they grabbed her, assassinated her, killed her. And so the dynasty of Omri comes to an end. It came to an end in Israel, and then in Judah comes to an end. Thoughts up to that point? There are prophets, Elijah, Elisha during this period. Also, probably during this early period, we have Joel and Obadiah. Back over to
This is where some of those 7,000
yes, yeah,
are, you know, playing a role.
yeah. All right, so back over to the north, we have the century of the Jehu dynasty, and Jehu effectively ended that dynasty of Omri, which is Ahab and his sons, and Jezebel. And Jehu is, you remember, God told Elijah that Jehu would be doing this, and he's commissioned to do this in a sense. And there's a lot of bloodshed, and it's almost like Jehu in his zeal took it too far. But he did obey God, but probably he took it too far. There's some information in history about this time. Shalmaneser is the Assyrian king, and what he writes ties in with what we have in Scripture, all these things. There's seals and impressions of this time. So Jehu founds the longest lasting dynasty of the northern kingdom, 5 generations of father and son. And he systematically purged the royal family, and we're down, as we said, to a slender thread or a flicker under Joash. One person said one of the sons of the prophets ignited the flame that Jehu fanned into a forest fire, and he broke into a group of captains, army captains, and asked to see Jehu privately. And this prophet anointed Jehu and commissioned him. And then when he left, Jehu kind of dismissed this
Some crazy guy.
crazy guy. And then his fellow captains eventually got out of him that he'd been crowned king. And so they said, Jehu is king. And so they spread the garments. So Jehu now is the king. And he races back to Jezreel. And that's where you have that statement, his riding is furious.
Yeah, yeah.
And he continues this purging, and Jezebel must have known what was about to happen. She painted her eyes, and she, as Jehu approached, she mocked, "Have you come in peace, Zimri, the murderer of your master?" That's her point is Zimri had murdered Baasha by murder or by taking it over, and you're like him. You're not any better. Jezebel was killed, and Jehu finished off the 70 sons of Ahab from different wives, placed those trophies on display. Some pretty gruesome things going on here.
What chapter are you in?
That is in 2 Kings 9. And Jehu has 80 of his men enter into the temple of Baal in chapter 10 and kill every priest and prophet of Baal. Yet, look at 2 Kings 10, 28, 29. Jehu destroyed Baal worship in Israel. However, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. So, it's not like Jehu is a Yahweh worshiper. He hates Baal.
He had a great opportunity.
He did. Like everybody else.
Yeah,
Like Solomon, like Jeroboam, Rehoboam. He ruled for 28 years, and that, you know, all these different years, it's hard for us to imagine because we can turn a page or two, and you go through that. Just think about, you know, like 28 years, and it's marked by turmoil and general unrest, and he's not very strong against you know, some of the people that are trying him around him. Shalmaneser III, the Assyrians are gaining a lot of power. Thoughts, comments, or we're going to move on to another king. Jehu reduced the influence of Baal worship during this time, but he didn't replace Baal worship with Yahweh worship.
it really is the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
You know, what it comes down to.
And there's been a lot of archaeological discoveries around this time, and there are a lot of names that have Baal in them that have been discovered. Now, somebody might just be named something, but again, if you're naming your children, putting Baal in names, that's probably saying that you're open to Baal worship. Jehu's son, Jehoahaz, is the next king. He ruled for the next 17 years. And very little is recorded of him. They're still having to deal with Syria, not Assyria, but Syria and their domination in 2 Kings 13. In the reign of Jehoahaz in Israel, things got so bad, it says, that the glorious empire is reduced to 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 soldiers, because the king of Aram had destroyed the rest and made them like the dust at threshing time. That's 2 Kings 13:7. Toward the end of Jehoahaz's reign, he temporarily abandoned the worship of the golden calf that Jeroboam had set up and turned to Yahweh. And he was given a deliverer to free from the power of Aram, or Syria. And that deliverer was the Assyrian king Hadad-Nirari, and he began his campaigns. So all this politics, Aram and Syria, you know, we have Damascus, we're going to take this and take this. No, we'll take it back from you. And then the big guys, the Assyrians and the Egyptians, get involved in all of that. And many of the narratives of Elisha take place during this time. When Jehoahaz died, any thoughts on him, or questions, comments?
I mean, like I said, chapter 13, where it says, you know, that he sought the favor of the Lord, and the Lord listened to him.
Yeah.
You know, through all that, but it was just a very temporary thing.
Yeah.
Again, he could have turned things around, but he didn't.
And remember, Kings is in the prophet section of the Hebrew Bible. And so it's more than history, it's theological history. And it's written after the events to explain how we ended up in the mess that we're in. And it's because we didn't listen to God. And so that's, and it's difficult study, you know, because we get bogged down in these kings and names and all that. But the theological message is to listen to God.
Well, and that God listened to him.
Yeah.
When he entreated him and all that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that shows the mercy of God, you know.
Certainly, when humans are less
Yeah.
what they should be. All right, when Jehoiakim died, his son Jehoash, you'd think some of these people could have different names.
Yeah, yeah. Too many,
Yeah,
similar. Some of them reigned at the same time.
exactly, yeah.
That's when it's really.
They should have made some agreement, you know.
Yeah.
Tell you what, you go by this. When he came to the throne, immediately the prophet Elisha promised him victory over the Arameans. And this is where he instructed the king, you know, strike the ground with arrows. And he did it 3 times, and that dismayed the prophet. But Elisha predicted he'd be victorious over Damascus 3 times.
I've always thought about that, you know, he didn't know what Elisha was wanting him to do, you know,
Yeah.
so, but I don't know.
So he won that battle.
So, since, you know, we've got the Hebrew scholar in here, when he gives him the command, strike the ground with them, does that mean, is there something like a continuing action, like he's
What?
striking?
So what chapter is that in?
That's in chapter 13.
Of 2 Kings, yeah.
That's it.
About verse 17, 18.
And what is the question?
So, I mean, is there something about the command he gives him to strike? Does that verb that he uses, does it imply more continual action? You know what I'm saying? Because he's expecting, you know, he only strikes it 3 times, he stops. You know, is there something about the language, the choice of words that would make him think that maybe he should be, like, keep doing that?
No, it just says, and he said to the king, strike upon the ground. So, just, it's just, I mean, it is, it is an imperfect in Hebrew, which means implying continual. No, I'm sorry, it's an imperative. And so he just said strike.
Yeah, because he makes a big deal about that, like you said.
You
about-
should have done
You should have,
Yeah.
more.
He struck 3 times and stopped. The man was angry and said, you should have struck it 5 or 6 times. I mean,
Yeah.
that was, you know.
It's interesting too, Joash, you know, when you read it back slightly in verse 14, you know, when he learns that Elisha is really sick, you know, he's very distraught. You know, my father, you know, the relationship has changed a little bit in the attitude of these kings toward Elisha.
Yeah. And perhaps it's not just, when you just struck 3 times, I mean, numbers have symbolic meanings, 6 and 7. Maybe it should have
Yeah.
been something like that. I mean, so is he going to stop, start, and strike, and then you're, okay, you stop now. Strike 50 times, or, you know, I don't know. It's a strange episode.
Yeah.
Well, and you never know, because he could have come back, he didn't, but he could have come back and Elisha could have said, because you have struck the ground 3 times, 3 times this terrible omen will come upon you.
Yeah.
I mean, just as easily, it could have been something bad that could have happened to him,
Yeah.
happened to,
Not knowing where this is headed,
right,
so, yeah.
I mean,
So we also don't know what his attitude was. I mean, it's hard to read in, anytime you're reading anything, Bible or anything else, it's hard to know the, I don't know, the environment, the attitude going on there. And so he could have been real half-hearted. That's what kind of I've always wondered.
I wouldn't be surprised, these kings. So, and it may be God is going way beyond and gracious with the deliverance that he does give. All right, any other questions that I can't answer?
I mean, you know, he told him to shoot the arrow, and then that was the arrow of victory over Syria, and then take the arrows and beat them, so maybe he was thinking he would put it together, you know, about it or something.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. It's still a little puzzling.
It is puzzling, have all the details, but again, what, this really strikes me and is impressive that God is willing to even do anything with some of
Yeah,
these guys. Joash, he was 7 years old, as we talked about, and the high priest Jehoiada presented him in public on the seventh day, and with a lot of guard around him. They placed the king on, or the crown on his head, and they shouted, "Long live the king." And he reigned for 40 years. We talked about Amaziah. I'm getting kind of mixed up on some of these names, so I got to back up. Oh yeah, let's talk about Joash, who was hidden as a child and protected, and then what happened later on in his life.
And didn't he kill the son, or had,
Yeah.
was Zechariah, was
Yeah,
that the prophet that was
yeah,
killed?
yeah,
But the end of his story is not.
yeah, it's tragic ending. The son of the high priest Jehoiada, he ended up giving the command to stone. And we're not going to get involved in this, but in Matthew 23, Jesus tells the Pharisees, "You're guilty of all the blood from Abel until Zechariah." But he calls him Zechariah, son of Berechiah. And some have suggested that is this Zechariah, but the problem is this Zechariah is not the son of Berechiah. The prophet Zechariah, his father, is named as Zedekiah in chapter 1 of his book. So there may be some textual issues going on, but and he may be. This is recorded, the death of this Zechariah, in the book of Chronicles. And Chronicles, Malachi is not the last book in the order of the Hebrew Bible. The last book in the order of the Hebrew Bible is Chronicles. Chronicles is in the writing section. So it fits in nicely if it's this Zechariah Jesus is talking about, because from the murder of the first person in the first book of the Hebrew Bible to the murder of the person in the book of the last book of the Hebrew Bible, and it works out nicely in English too, from A to Z. But probably the best way to work through that is that it's not this Zechariah Jesus is talking about. Okay, thoughts, comments before we take a break here? All right, let's take a break, 10 minutes maybe. And, Joash was finally assassinated, so let's stop with that. And he was not buried among the kings. Okay, break time. All right, I guess we'll get going back again. It'll be a challenge to get to the fall of the Northern Kingdom.
I don't know how you're keeping it straight.
15 minutes.
I'm getting very
I'm just-
confused.
Well-
Figure out where you
My
are.
brain- I'm just, my brain's going this way.
Yeah,
Not that way, but this way.
The Northern Kingdom hasn't fallen yet.
Yeah.
The Bible is very helpful when you're reading Kings,
Yes.
because so many times I think I'm reading the same, I think about that Bible, that
Got
battle before,
Yeah,
but if it's placed chronologically,
Yeah.
it seems to
helpful, I think, because in the method, the writer of Kings, he goes back and forth. It's almost like, it's like watching a movie and then you get a flashback or jump over to something else. It's not easy keeping it straight. Okay, when Joash is assassinated, this is on Judah, on Judah's side, Joash, about the middle there. That did not bring it into the Davidic line because his son, Amaziah, ruled for 29 years. And the last years of his reign were with his son, and let's talk about Amaziah. He, may have skipped some of this. He's trying to, with the information we have, he's trying to open up the trade routes again, and he had ambitious plans. He hired mercenary soldiers from northern Israel, and he was rebuked by a man of God for hiring those soldiers, so he sent them back home. And they, the kind of people that are mercenary soldiers are not, they didn't like that very much. And so they plundered some of the cities, killing about 3,000 people. This is in 2 Chronicles 25. He campaigned against, he was victorious over the Edomites, and he campaigned against Israel. He confronted the king of Israel, and the basis for that war is not known. But Israel's king, Jehoash, he's about middle ways down there too, responded in a way that ain't nobody got time for this, is kind of what he said. He had little time or respect for Amaziah, and he says, like a proverb, it's the mighty cedar of Lebanon and a thistle, and arrogantly demanding that the cedar provide the thistle with a daughter as a wife. And he said what ends up is that the thistle gets stomped in the ground. And so don't fool me, don't fool with Jehoash, because I'm just going to run all over you. Amaziah wasn't too wise. He was determined, and so the armies met. And in 2 Chronicles 25, it tells us Amaziah's stubborn persistence is from the Lord to punish him for idolatry. Like we've seen those type of things before. Amaziah barely escaped with his life, and Jehoash treated him mercifully as a prisoner. He took him captive to Samaria. Amaziah outlived Jehoash by 15 years, so he was set free. That his being set free probably has something to do with the death of the guy who captured you. But if Amaziah thought Jehoash was a strong leader to deal with, the next king is Jeroboam II, and he has to deal with him. And there's a conspiracy against Amaziah, and he had to flee Jerusalem, and he was killed, and his son was on the throne. Uzziah, and they ruled together for 20 years. Now the writer of Kings goes back over to Israel and talks about Jeroboam II. And if there's a golden period, Jeroboam II probably is that time, the golden period of economic growth, and he restored the boundaries almost to the original boundaries. 2 Kings 14 tells us this. And he regained control because, these kings are capturing these places and then they lose the places. Somebody takes it. And then they recapture it, and so he regained control of a lot of things that were lost, places that were lost. Jeroboam, look at notes here. So he had turned Israel back into one of the great powers of the day. You know, he spoke about the wealth and economic conditions. It was so prosperous. You have Amos during this time of Jeroboam II. And it's so prosperous during this time that Amos says that the wives are on beds inlaid with ivory and lounging on couches, and they're playing instruments, and they're drinking wine not out of cups but out of bowls. And then he says, and they're not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. That's Amos 6. Hosea warned the same thing. Ephraim boasts, I am rich, I become wealthy. But they would fall. Isaiah says that Samaria was a fading flower. And so Assyria has kind of got other things going on during the time of Jeroboam II. That's why he could be so successful in taking some of these places back. So when things were good, they were very good. And he died in 753, and that's going to begin now the end of the northern kingdom. It's a slide downward after Jeroboam II. He was followed by his son Zechariah. We're in the northern kingdom still. And he's the final king in the Yehu dynasty. And he ruled 6 months, and he was assassinated. Look on the chart there. So we have Jeroboam II, and then Zechariah, and Shallum assassinated Zechariah, and he took the throne. And the only thing we really know about Zechariah, he continued to worship in the golden calves. That's still going on. But you have assassinations and all that. All right, that kind of places the pause on the northern kingdom down at Shalom. Jump back over to Judah. So before we jump over there, any comments, questions?
In America, when did we finally get the last king in the Yehu dynasty? Because we got a bunch of Yehus.
Yeah, that's good. Glad you did that. That may be one of those comments. Rick said he watches, he watched online, and you can't hear what the comments of people say, just how I respond. And so I feel I must give Scotty credit for this. Scotty has said we have a lot of yahoos around.
I didn't vote for any of them.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. They didn't vote for any of these yahoos either.
No, they didn't. It's even worse there, yeah. They weren't term limited.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on this? You top what Scotty said. All right. Let's go over to the south of Judah, and it's the reign of Azariah. Amaziah's successor was Amaziah, and he's sometimes called also Azariah, is on this chart. And he ruled 52 years, and it's longer than any previous king in Israel or Judah, and that's in 2 Kings chapter 14, 21, 22, and then chapter 15. So Judah, like the north, is experiencing prosperity during this long reign. He is co-regent with his father for the first part, like some of these other kings, he began well, but he failed to finish. Asa was guided by a prophet. Joash was guided by a priest. Uzziah or Azariah had the prophet Zechariah as his influence. And it says in 2 Chronicles 26:5, he sought the Lord God during the days of Zechariah, who instructed in the fear of God. As long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success. But then that changed. And so he has, early part of his reign, outstanding achievements. He's building cities and towers, and he came up with some siege warfare machines. He attacked the Philistines and some of their cities, Gath, Ashdod. The last years of his reign are shared with his son because he intruded into the priestly office and was struck with leprosy. And he had spent the last years of his life as a leper. Now, during this time, these are the 8th century, and you have prophets that are very active, writing prophets during this time. Amos, Hosea, Jonah, Micah, and Isaiah. I mean, it says in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. And each of these play a role in calling the people back to God. And they're especially forceful. And notice it's, I guess you could characterize it generally as a time of economic good, things are going well. But that's a very dangerous time spiritually because the people had forgotten God. During this time as well, the Assyrians are growing and growing and growing, and this is going to lead up to the fall of Samaria. Trying to skip some of this if I can. Assyria was content up to this point of just taking stuff here, you know, in cities here. But then they're growing in power, and they have some powerful rulers. Tiglath-Pileser III, taking care of the Babylonians as well. All right, thoughts, comments? So we were in the south at Azariah. We jump back over to the north, or Israel, and we are up to Shalom and Menachem. Shalom, remember, assassinated King Zechariah and took the throne, and he was murdered by Menachem, probably a military leader at that time. And he came from Tirzah, which was the old capital of Israel, and the Assyrians are moving all around, and there are different thoughts among these these kings, the kings of Israel and Judah and Aram and all those. And some are pro-Assyria. They're basically saying we can't conquer them. It'd be a good thing if Assyria could control all this. They'll take care of us. We'll just send some money to them, and you know. So there were pro-Assyrian movements, and then there were anti-Assyrian movements. Menachem came from Tirzah, and the chief event in Kings, this is 2 Kings 15, 19, and 20, is his tribute to Tiglath-Pileser. Tiglath-Pileser is an Assyrian king. And Menahem is paying tribute. Basically, it's like, okay, I'll pay paying the mob to protect you. You know, you get involved in all that. And so Menahem imposed a poll tax on each of the mighty men for 50 shekels of silver, totaling 1,000 talents of silver. One writer said 1 talent equals 3,000 shekels. And the book that I found this in is probably 10 years old. So he says, thus the total must have been 66,000 pounds of silver, which at current market averages of $4 an ounce would be worth $4,244,000 per year. You got to pay. And then you get involved with all these people and you pay a little bit and they say, well, we want some more. Where's the end of it? So paying that tribute to Tiglath-Pileser, it buys some time. The upper classes felt the pinch. So you had a good economic period before, and now there's these heavy taxes under Menahem. Menahem must have thought of himself as somebody important, but from the standpoint of Tiglath-Pileser, it's nothing. Tiglath-Pileser III wrote about Menahem in his writings, in his annals, and he said, as for Menahem, I overwhelmed him like a snowstorm, and he fled like a bird alone and bowed at my feet. I guess so, sending all that money every year. All right, Menahem's son, Pekah, reigned 2 more years in this dynasty. His father died, but he reigns, and he too was assassinated by military leaders, and he's starting to have some anti-Assyrian thoughts as well. We're getting tired of paying all these people, and they're wanting to join in, you know, we're going to join in together against the Assyrians, and some people do and some people don't want to do that. And so Pekah, he reigned 20 years, but he really just reigns over Gilead, and so it's not much of a king. During this time, and Isaiah speaks of this, you have Rezin, R-E-Z-I-N, of Aram, or of Damascus, Pekah, and Samaria, and they're going to try to oppose the Assyrians, and they want the king of Judah, Akaz, you skip over there, they want him to join in there with them, and he won't. And Isaiah goes to him and says, don't worry about those kings over there. They're like 2 logs on fire. They're just going to burn out. This whole thing's going to burn out. But they're really pressuring him. Tiglath-Pileser moves through the area. He executes Rezin, the king of Damascus. He takes that territory as Assyrian territory. He reduces all these other nations around, and over there on Israel, you have Hoshea as the last king, and he ruled for the last final 9 years. He paid tribute to Tiglath-Pileser and to his successor, either voluntarily or he just coerced to do it. And eventually Hoshea said, I'm not going to pay anymore. And he appealed to an Egyptian pharaoh. He is in 2 Kings 17:4 said to be So, S-O. And there are no records in Egypt of a pharaoh named that, so that's kind of a difficult matter. And it may be, it's another name for an Egyptian pharaoh. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It happened because Scripture says it, but it's difficult to determine why Hoshea decides I'm not going to pay the Assyrians anymore. Maybe he thought, well, the king of Egypt will come up here, or Pharaoh of Egypt will help me, and we'll take care of him. So Shalmaneser V is now the ruler in Assyria, and he'd had more than enough of all these rebellions. And he took Hoshea by force, 2 Kings 17:4. He laid siege to Samaria, 2 Kings 17. That's for 3 years. He finally captured it, and they deported some of the people and imported other populations in there. Now, the fall of Samaria then is, and that 722 Assyrian captivity is a big blow because people wrestled. It's so severe. And there would be people who would be asking the theological question, how can God allow this to happen? And it seems the plain, if you listen to God, the plain answer would be because we didn't listen to God. That's why. He warned this. There are curses and blessings in the covenant. We didn't listen to God. And so the writer of Kings pauses. Look at 2 Kings 17. And verse 7. And he feels like I need to pause and give all these reasons why this happened. So it happened because, verse 7, the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the statutes of the nations, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel which they practiced. And the children of Israel did things that were not right to the Lord their God. And they built high places in all the cities. He's just listing it down. Here are the theological reasons this happened. From the tower of the watchman to the fortified city. And they set on them pillars and asherim, under every high tree and under every leafy tree. And there they offered in the high places, as did the nations the Lord carried away before them, and did wicked things to provoke the Lord. And they served idols, whereof the Lord had said, you shall not do this thing. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by the hand of every prophet, every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways, keep my commandments and statutes, according to all the law which I command your fathers, which I sent you by the hand of my servants the prophets. Notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their neck, like the neck of their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers. They went after things of nothing, really, it says. And after the nations, they forsook all the commandment. I mean, how far down do we have to read to get the point that they didn't listen to God? And so this seems like it's really a dedicated effort to show here's why this happened. They served, in verse 16, they forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God, made molten image, even 2 calves, made Asherah, worshipped all the host of heaven, served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination, enchantments, gave themselves over to do what was evil in the eyes of the Lord, to provoke him. And the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. Also, Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel, which they practiced. And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel and afflicted them. He tore Israel from the house of David, and then it goes back to Jeroboam, son of Nebat. So, it's not that God was helpless or that God didn't care to come rescue. It's that they didn't listen to God. And Isaiah prophesied this is going, and all the prophets, this is going to happen. And it did. All right, thoughts, comments? Now, some of the remnant of the northern people, of the tribes, fled to the south. Some were deported, taken away. The way the Assyrians did, they would take away a lot of the native people and then bring others. You got to moving people around and transplant other people there. So they intermarried, and that's said to be the origin of the Samaritans during this time period. And Isaiah prophesied, this is in chapter 7, verse 8 of Isaiah, that the whole deportation would take place over 65 years. So 65 years of this. And that's what happened, of moving all these people around, then these different Assyrian kings coming to power. Let me see. Ezra 4, verse 2 says that the Samaritan population wanted to work with the governor Zerubbabel, and Joshua in rebuilding the temple. And that text says, they persisted in their claim and said, we have been sacrificing to Yahweh since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. So, thoughts? So bad did it get that the lions even took over the land. And the Assyrians thought, well, we need to send some priests back and see if they can do something. It's probably not true Yahweh priests, probably priests associated with the golden calves and Baal. And they do that. And then in 2 Kings 17, verse 29, each national group made its own gods in these several towns. So in 722, the northern kingdom went into Assyrian slavery. Thoughts, comments before we move back over to Judah for a few minutes. All right, Assyria is still dominating, and so Judah's continuing, but Assyria is still in the land, and so there are brushes, with that. And we'll talk about that great account of Sennacherib and Hezekiah, how that God delivers Hezekiah from that. So the Assyrians previously had left Judah pretty much to themselves, usually limiting campaigns to Damascus. But after 740, things began to change. Akaz, as you go over to Judah, is the king, and he, at the beginning of his reign, he was pro-Assyrian. And he, let me look at this. The nobility of Jerusalem probably thought, well, we might be better off if we just submit to the Assyrians rather than, trying to go against them. So all these Assyrian rulers are moving through, and Egypt's involved in all this as well. Assyria's trying to take some of Egypt, and Egypt's up here trying to take some of these cities in the land. And there is in the land a general rebellion against the Assyrians. And so there's Assyrian trying to revolt against them. And a lot of during this period, if you start with Akaz and we go down to Hezekiah and following, this is well supported by history outside of the Bible. I mean, the Bible is trustworthy and inspired by God, but this period is well supported by historical sources outside of the Bible as well. We have records from these kings, as they would sometimes not only record what happened, but they would carve something on the wall. It's almost like a photograph that you have. And they would make cylinders to record what they did. And a lot of these are scattered throughout museums. The Egyptian material is not so, for this time period, is not so supported, but the Assyrians write about the Egyptians and what he's doing and all that. All right, so we're down to, on Judah, Yotam. Judah's been trying to make it through the storm that's brewing all around them with the Assyrians this time by being a vassal of Assyria. We'll just pay you and you leave us alone. Yotam ruled in his father's place after his father Uzziah was stricken with leprosy, as we've said, and he I don't have the dates total of what he would rule. I guess you could look that up, but he is conquering these different Ammon. He conquers that. He's paying tribute to Tiglath-Pileser, and Rezin, the king of Damascus, is out here basically saying, well, we're going to make a power play of all these different nations, and we'll get rid of the Assyrians. And well, we did we talk about Akaz and Isaiah coming to him and saying, don't get involved in all of that.
Not yet.
And Ahaz is not a good king. He was not a godly king. He reigned for 28 years. He was the son of Jotham. And Ahaz's wife and the mother, Ahaz's son is Hezekiah. And so Ahaz's wife and the mother of King Hezekiah was of, the 2 Kings 18:2, Avi, the daughter of Zechariah. And if, we don't know for sure, but that could be, remember we had a Zechariah over there in Israel as a king? If that's true, then you have some marrying between Israel and Judah again, like we had in Ahab and Jezebel. That might explain why he didn't follow Yahweh. It says that he had godly ancestors, but he instead preferred to walk, 2 Kings 16:3, in the ways of the kings of Israel. So this is the king of Judah, but it says he preferred to walk in the ways of the kings of Israel. He sacrificed to Baal. He offered his son to Molech in the valley of Hinnom. He had a pagan altar built after he saw a copy of it, or he saw a model of it in Damascus. Brought that into the temple area. It's almost like Ahab and Jezebel again. And this is a king of Judah. And he didn't see what happened in the northern kingdom. All right, so he's pressed all around to join this anti-Assyrian coalition. Rezin was pressuring him. And over here, before Israel fell in 722, Pekah is pressuring him. And Isaiah comes to him, and he's, I mean, they're terrified because it says they're shaken. And Isaiah says, don't get involved with these kings, and God will deliver you. And that's tied in also with the son that will be born, and it says, he's a yet unborn son in the Davidic line. And it says before he's mature enough to know right from wrong, Isaiah 7:10-16, the threat of these kings will be gone. And Ahaz's response was, I'm not going to listen to the prophet. He didn't listen. And he appealed to Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian king, for help. So he's not anti-Assyrian, he's appealing to the Assyrians. And he sent a gift, it says, you put gift in quotation marks, to the king. And probably Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian king, knows what all's going on here anyway, because he's on the march already. And he receives that gift, which is really a bribe. And he says, okay, in 2 Chronicles 28:20, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came to him, but gave him trouble instead of help. And the gift turned out to be a requirement for annual tribute every year. He interpreted gift as the first installment of what you're going to keep paying me. And so trying to bypass and not listening to the prophet Isaiah turned into this mess. Ahaz remained in service to Assyria for the rest of his life. And when Tiglath-Pileser died, there were some other people trying. I mean, anytime a king dies, it's a dangerous time, and they try to rebel on different ones. But the next Assyrian king is Shalmaneser V, and he's not going to put up with this. He reacts with speed. He dispatched his troops, and that stunned a lot of people. And Shalmaneser comes down. Shalmaneser, I think, is the one who captures Samaria. And you'd think that Ahaz would learn something from that, but he didn't. All right, let's talk for a few. Any thoughts or before we get to Hezekiah? he was 11 years old when he began his co-reign with his father, and being that young, he didn't have much impact morally. And that comes later when he became sole ruler. And he initiated this 2 Kings 18, a return to Yahweh. And he severed all ties with Assyria. He reopened, repaired the temple. He re-inaugurated the celebration of Passover. He tore down pagan altars. But and there's one, it's mentioned especially in 2 Kings 18, 3 and 4, and 2 Chronicles 31, that serpent, you know, that Moses was instructed to make in the wilderness, and that'd been hanging around, and they ended up worshiping it. And so Hezekiah had that, he dealt with that, destroyed that. While all these reforms are going on, there's also these big nations, Assyria and Egypt, and Assyria sends Sargon, or Sargon is the ruler, and he sends his field marshal in that area, and Hezekiah quickly pays up his tribute to him. But then, and I really want to deal with this before we stop tonight, Sargon's son, Sennacherib, came to the throne, and he's faced with a rebellion, but Hezekiah is going to retaliate against the Assyrians, and he makes all kind of preparation for that. He made new weapons, he reinforced the military, he built a wall, and one thing that stands out is his tunnel that he had dug. He stopped up the water of the Gihon spring outside of Jerusalem because the enemy could use that, and then he built this famous Siloam tunnel to bring that water inside the walls of Jerusalem. And that's really an amazing account. The workers worked on both ends. It's almost a third of a mile, and they're going through solid rock, and they hear the picks on the other side, and they come within a few inches of meeting each other. And then they inscribed that, and when it was done, and what was done, and that's called the Siloam inscription. And it was discovered, and it's not in Israel now, it's in Turkey, I think, but the Israeli people are wanting, would like to have that back. I've never seen it, but it's an amazing archaeological discovery for Hezekiah's tunnel, Siloam.
Okay, so did the tunnel actually finally connect?
It did. You can
So
go.
what's the thing about the 2 inches? That's where they did.
That's where they met. Yeah, within that. Workers on that side, workers on this side. Is Hezekiah's tunnel on that list? Yeah. You can walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. You been through Hezekiah's tunnel? I haven't either. We were not able to go there when I went.
I'd love to go through it.
It's really an amazing thing. And then you have the Pool of Siloam, and also in the life of Jesus, the Pool of Siloam in John's Gospel, John chapter 9. All right, Sennacherib is, anything else? Sennacherib's moving through the land, and he moves up to Jerusalem. He lays siege to Lachish, and he pictures that on the walls of his palace, like a photograph, carving that out. And all these battles are going on, and Hezekiah had said before, I'm not going to pay tribute to you. And then in 2 Kings 18, with all these other battles going on, Hezekiah says, okay, I'll pay. But Sennacherib was not satisfied with that, and so he sends 3 lieutenants. And this is in 2 Kings 18, and this is these are high-level officials, and they're using psychological warfare. Tartan, Tartan, that means the second in rank. Rav Sharis, the chief eunuch. Rav Shakah, the chief officer. And they read out the words of the king and the people here on the wall, and they read it out in Hebrew. And it's saying, you might as well surrender. Who has been victorious over the king of Assyria? The king of Assyria could stop up the Jordan River with his foot. The king of Assyria is, and you cry out to your God, Yahweh. Hezekiah's made him angry because he's done all these reforms around here. Can't cry out to any other gods. So you might as well just submit.
It's like sending the vice president and the secretary of state and the chief of staff, you know.
Yeah.
To say, we're here.
Yeah.
We're staying.
And Sennacherib surrounded the city, and he would have forced it into total submission, but what happened? God intervened, didn't he? Sennacherib lost 185,000. And he didn't write about that in his records. He just
Left
said,
that up then.
he just said we had to go home.
Took my toys and go home.
That's right. The ancient historian Herodotus said that this was the result of mice devouring the bows and the quivers and everything, and that could be part of it. You know, God could have used that. Could have been bubonic plague, but it was God working in this. Sennacherib did write about his dealings with Hezekiah. He said, and there's a prism, it's called Taylor Prism or Sennacherib's Prism. It's in the British Museum. Y'all, have you been to the British Museum? You were going to go, right, before COVID,
Yeah.
I haven't been either. But it's,
I've been.
have you been?
It takes 2 months to go through it.
Did you see Sennacherib's Prism? Do you remember it? It's in the British Museum. But it's in cuneiform. And it says, Sennacherib says on it that I shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. And so he couldn't resist. There's no use resisting any further, he says.
And without God, he did have him shut up like that.
Yeah,
Without God's intervention.
you have to leave. And I'm not a fan of, I guess, Lord Byron and his life, but I'm not really a fan of poetry much. You ever read his poem about Sennacherib?
Yeah.
It's really the horse and his rider. I don't know all of it, but it's really puts it very dramatically. Look that up. Lord Byron and what's the name of the poem? Just Sennacherib, I guess. I don't know. And any questions, comments on that episode? That's a really amazing, dramatic episode. God working. There are 2 other events in Hezekiah's life that we need to mention that stand out. One is his illness, severe illness. And this probably happened, I guess, right at or right about the time that Sennacherib invaded the land. And Hezekiah prayed to God that he might recover, and through the prophet Isaiah, and so this is recorded in Isaiah, and it's recorded also in Kings, Yahweh gives him 15 more years, graciously.
Was that good or bad?
I don't know. It's an amazing picture of answered prayer in some ways.
But he became a different man.
Yes, exactly. Shortly after his recovery, the second event, this is in Isaiah 39, he received a state visit from Merodach Baladan from Babylon. And the purpose of the visit, the outward purpose of the visit seemed to be to wish Hezekiah well on his recovery. Probably the main purpose was to gain a comrade to against Assyria. But do you remember what Hezekiah did when these?
Let me just do everything again.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
how'd that go over with the prophet?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they brought lavish gifts. It's a diplomatic, and Hezekiah had opened up showed all the wealth of Judah. But he was rebuked by Isaiah and prophesied that one day the nation these men represent would come and seize all that treasury that you just nonchalantly exposed to view. All right, comments on Hezekiah? He's one of the last good kings. But it's almost going to be too late for it. 3 minutes. Let's just stop right there. We'll pick up with Manasseh next week. And again, we'll get as far as we can. And I know we'll get to the Babylonian captivity, but I don't know if we'll get into a little bit of the exile and post-exilic, but we'll try to get as far as we can. Again, the Babylonian captivity was a strong blow theologically. How did this happen? How can God allow this to happen? Yet again, God promised deliverance after 70 years from that. All right, comments, questions?
The Israelites, Judah and all that, I thought they were bulletproof.
Yep.
There was a force built around them, like this.
Like Jeremiah, the temple, we have the temple.
The temple.
We have the temple. Go look at Shiloh, see what happened. Temple was destroyed. And it, it's turned into just outward, going through the motions, as Jeremiah shows and Isaiah had shown. Okay, thank you again for being here. We're going to close with prayer. Glenn, we ask you to lead our prayer, please.
Father, we're very grateful for another time that we could be in study and be reminded of the history of your people and their failings and the cautions and the warnings that your message continues to speak to us today. We pray that we'll take those things to heart. Pray that we'll develop a trust in you and confidence in your power to save, your power to deliver us from death and into eternal life through Jesus our Savior. Pray that you'll bless us as we go about our walk and leave this place this evening. Ask for your safety and protection and your blessings in the days to come. We're mindful of the conflict, the war that's taking place in Israel today, and we ask that you would help bring about peace and justice, and that as always, you would create an environment in which people would be hungry for your will and your word. We pray that we'll be ready to speak your word when we have opportunity. Pray that you'll forgive us of our sins. We ask this in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for hanging in here tonight. I know some of this is difficult to get through. So I hope you have a good rest of the week.